On Inauguration Day, March 4, 1861, Abraham Lincoln spoke these words about the deeply divided nation. "We must not be enemies. The mystic chords of memory, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." 7 Southern states had already seceded from the Union and formed the Confederacy. Then came April 12, 1861. On that day, Fort Sumter suffered a barrage of Confederate artillery fire. America was at war, civil war. The next 4 years would drown out the chorus of the Union and deafen the nation to her better angels. From its inception, the new republic was marked by a terrible paradox. American freedom was established while American slavery endured. In 1776, the 13 colonies spanned just under 900,000 square miles. In 1861, the United States covered about 3 million square miles. As the nation expanded, the tensions over whether new territories would become slave or free states mounted. Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery. His election convinced many Southerners that their political power was diminishing. 7 Southern states seceded from the Union. South Carolina attempted to get the federal government to relinquish its properties there, including Fort Sumter. The fort was brand new, in fact, built on granite and situated 4 miles off the coast of Charleston. It had 40-feet-high brick walls and a capacity for 650 soldiers and 146 big guns. In the winter of 1860, there were only about 80 soldiers in the Charleston garrison. The interior of Fort Sumter was still under construction, so the Union forces were temporarily stationed at Fort Moultrie, 1 mile away. The garrison commander, Major Robert Anderson, was a Kentuckian and former slaveholder. His sympathies lay with the South, but he was loyal to the Union. Anderson saw the inevitability of a Confederate attempt to seize the new fort. On December 26, 1860, under the cloak of night, he moved his garrison into Fort Sumter. Northerners praised the move. Southerners denounced it. In Charleston, the local paper accused Anderson of initiating a civil war. Under President Buchanan's orders, Army General-in-Chief Winfield Scott sent 200 reinforcements to Fort Sumter. They traveled on a merchant ship called the Star of the West. As the ship approached the Charleston Harbor on January 9, 1861, South Carolinian guns opened fire, striking the vessel and sending it into permanent retreat. Surrender was demanded, but Anderson refused. In his inaugural address on March 4, 1861, Lincoln promised not to concede any federal properties. When he first stepped into his office, Lincoln found a dispatch from Major Anderson. His forces were in dire need of provisions. Rations would soon run out. Weeks before, the Confederacy had officially been formed and Jefferson Davis elected its president. He assigned Pierre G.T. Beauregard to command all forces encircling Fort Sumter. No longer strictly South Carolinian, the men who squared off against Anderson and his men were now Confederates. As tensions mounted, General Scott and the Secretary of State William Seward favored withdrawing the federal garrison from Fort Sumter. Seward, in fact, leaked word to Confederate commissioners and the press that the fort would soon be vacated. Most of Lincoln's cabinet agreed with Scott and Seward. One man did not, Montgomery Blair, the Postmaster General. He argued that giving up Fort Sumter would weaken the federal government's position. Lincoln agreed. So did public opinion in the North. Appalled that Fort Sumter would soon be given over to the Confederates, newspapers and civic leaders predicted that Lincoln's presidency was, for all intents and purposes, over just days into his first term. On March 28th, General Scott decided to evacuate Fort Sumter and Fort Pickens. His reasons were not military, but political, to reassure the 8 remaining slaveholding states in the Union, including his own, Virginia. Upset by Scott's scheme, Lincoln called a meeting of his cabinet where he read the general's directive. Now the cabinet majority moved Lincoln's way and called for reinforcing Anderson and his men. Lincoln decided that he would send unarmed supply boats into the Charleston Harbor. Armed reinforcements would remain on the transport ships nearby, ready were battle to break out. If the Confederates opened fire, they could be blamed for the start of the war. If, however, they let the supply boats through, peace would be preserved for another day, and the federal properties retained as Lincoln promised in his inaugural speech. On April 6, 1861, the President conveyed a message to South Carolina's Governor Francis Pickens that he intended only to supply provisions for Anderson and his men. If such attempt be not resisted, no effort to throw in men, arms, or ammunition will be made. The next move now belonged to the Confederacy. Southern leaders especially feared voluntary reconstruction of the Union. From Alabama came this newspaper appeal to Confederate President Davis: "Sir, unless you sprinkle blood in the face of the dying people of Alabama, they will be back in the old Union in less than 10 days. War, in other words, was the best way to hold the Confederate states together. On April 9th, under advisement from his cabinet, Jefferson Davis ordered Beauregard to take Fort Sumter before support could arrive. On April 12th, Beauregard's artillery opened fire. For 34 hours, Fort Sumter was pummeled. The Federal fleet just outside Charleston Harbor was hit by a gale and scattered. Only one of the 3 unarmed boats intended for shuttling supplies to the fort actually made it to the harbor, the USS Yankee. Because of heavy seas and the Confederate bombardment, the Yankee could not reach Anderson and the Union forces. On April 13, 1861, Anderson surrendered, and the American flag lowered at Fort Sumter.